Elevator systems. Bowen family systems theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, the podcast that looks at Bowen family systems theory in brief and understandable ways. Today we are continuing into hot topic territory. We are recording this in April 2026 in a time when politics may be just about the hottest topic around. And joining us to talk about politics today is Dr. Robert Davis. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thank you.
Robert is founder and executive director of Seasoned With Grace UnBoxed, a nonprofit committed to helping develop strong, authentic leaders, as well as bringing communities together to develop solutions around public safety and policing. And you can read more about the organization in the show notes, and I'll add all the links there as well. Robert also has over 20 years of experience as a senior pastor, family life educator, hospice chaplain, bereavement coordinator, and community leader. Thank you for joining us, and you get the first elevator pitch on politics and Bowen theory.
Well, Bowen theory has helped me to approach, and when I talk about politics in this context, I'm talking about it from community organizing and working with elected officials to try to get various policies implemented, specifically around public safety. And so Bowen theory has helped me in many ways, but I just mentioned two of them for time's sake. Number one, it has really helped me to become clear about my guiding principles. This really does help to guide how I show up in all my interactions, especially when having difficult community conversations or dealing with elected officials who have their own agenda that you have to kind of navigate around. So having those guiding principles and being clear about them really does help me to show up consistently in these conversations. Number two, it has really helped me to minimize my overfunctioning. You know, when you talk about marginalized communities, working in marginalized communities, working with individuals who are dealing with addiction or, other issues, other challenges, mental health challenges, there can be a tendency, especially when you come from a helper background, being a pastor, etc., there can be a tendency to overfunction rather than to equip individuals and communities to think through and to solve their own problems. There is this knee-jerk, and I struggle with it tremendously, to come in and to solve problems. And so Bowen theory has really helped me to identify times when I'm overfunctioning and to think about how do I actually transfer the responsibility to the people who are in fact responsible for their own destiny.
Thank you, Robert. So I had a hard time with figuring out what I was going to pitch for this one. So I did I found out a lot about my own reactivity when I was thinking about this episode, especially I think in the here and now of the world. So I did a little definition of what is politics. I think it was AI that I got this from actually. And I thought it was interesting. So I'm going to read that and then I'm going to do my pitch, which was, at its most fundamental level, politics is the process by which groups of people make collective decisions. It encompasses the acquisition and exercise of power, the negotiation of compelling interests, and the creation and enforcement of rules, and the organization of society. The word itself comes from the ancient Greek polis, I could be pronouncing that wrong, meaning city-state, referring to the idea that politics is inseparable from organized human community. And I don't know what it is about a definition, but it calmed me down a little bit and it helped me to think, because I thought I heard so much Bowen theory in that. So my pitch for politics is, I find it useful to observe politics through the same systemic lens as any other system. And the practice of politics has the same characteristics described throughout Bowen family systems theory. I think Dr. Davis just gave two good examples of ways to use that thinking. And I think it's one area where an individual can really work on differentiation in interaction with a larger system and often under tension. Like, I think it's the work of differentiation. So the question I will put at the end of my pitch is, I wonder if people's functioning around politics might mirror their functioning in their families. So maybe that's something we can talk about later that I'm interested in. Dixie, what have you got?
Well, my pitch might, I talk about my family at the end of my pitch. So there you go. I recently read a definition that politics boils down to a power struggle between people or groups. So for me, individuality and togetherness comes to mind. Politics is about different parties competing for power, meeting the needs and desires of different groups, balancing individual and collective needs and rights, and carrying those out at local, regional, national, and international levels, which will each have differing needs and capacities. You can think individuality and togetherness while observing people who run for office for their own self-promotion rather than the interests of society. And I think it offers a good explanation for secret ballot voting. And then finally, on a personal note, Bowen theory has helped me to think about the different levels of maturity with which I have told my father, I'm going to go cancel out your vote, Dad, on election day throughout the years. And I actually had a great conversation with him about it last night. So a couple other pitches. In a letter that Dr. Bowen wrote in 1970, he said, I'm glad you are concerned about the terrible state of the world today. Without plenty of people to do the worrying, we might go to pot faster. If we'd all get behind the thing and worry more, maybe we could find a quicker answer. He went on, personally, I'm not too concerned about the future of the nation and the republic. I would go along with the notion that the young probably have the answers, but I would not go along with the notion that the loudmouth dissidents have the answers. I think the thoughtful, serious youngsters are the ones, just as the thoughtful, serious ones had the answers for 50 or 100 years ago. I have a lot to say about this issue, but I would go too far if I opened the subject. So that's where he closes his thoughts. And I won't read from it, but there's an article by Catherine Gratwick Baker in the Family Systems Journal called Emotional Process in Society, and which I will link to. And she created in that a societal scale of differentiation. And one of the categories is governance, which I thought people could go to, is very interesting. Okay, last pitch from Dr. Kerr's Bowen Theory Secrets. Sibling position also has an interesting impact on people's political views. Not surprisingly, oldest children tend to support establishment views. Youngest siblings, in contrast, are more prone to anti-establishment views, even to being radically rebellious. Maybe there go my comment to my father. Again, level of maturity in each case plays a key role in whether someone dogmatically adheres to one political view versus another. It's compelling to see how much the emotional system can affect which lever a person pulls in the voting box. Okay, what do you notice in all the pitches?
One thing I heard in everything is I think this hard work of, if I think differently than someone else, how do I stay engaged in conversation with them? I mean, I think politics shows that more than, well, I don't know, it shows up in families all the time, but like the effort to just, I mean, my default, especially in today's age, is to sometimes watch something on television and just say, oh, that person is an idiot, and just to really not be interested in engaging the conversation. And I do think that is the hard work of politics. I mean, I heard that in your pitch too, Robert, that engaging people who think differently.
And what I heard from each of us is the importance of defining self, especially within all relationships. I won't say especially, but within all relationship systems. And based off of the definition that both you, Katie, and Dixie shared, it appears that politics is a relationship system.
Yeah.
Even though we think about politics being the way the relationship system functions, it appears that politics in and of itself is a relationship system. And so what I heard was one has to define self when inside of a politic system, relationship system.
Yeah. And I think to me, taking that to the next step is that and it will exhibit the exact same mechanisms that we see in a family, which we can watch playing out on television right now, right? Over and under functioning, conflict, distance, cutoff. I mean, all of those
Triangles.
mechanisms that we talk about. Yeah, triangulation, projection on a certain group of people. I think all of those are seen every day in the acting out of this system.
And in this most recent, bout of America's in my lifetime, and I'm 51 years old. America in my lifetime has been very politically polarized, and I'm always amazed when people talk about how this is the worst how politics has ever been. I'm like, well, I don't know what country you've been living in, but okay. A few years before I was born, they were actually shooting politicians and civil rights leaders and others dead. I mean, so I don't think you can get any more hostile and toxic than murdering people that you disagree with. But with that being said, one of the things I think is a big struggle in today's society, because of the polarization, is becoming clear about facts. And I really do appreciate the focus in Bowen theory around the importance of just being factual. So oftentimes when we talk about, particular policies and particular actions that various politicians or political parties have taken, whether it be war, whether it be, how the poor and marginalized are resourced or under-resourced, the high emphasis on benefits giving to the wealthy, and all of those conversations that we have over and over again. What I've noticed is that when the political party that I am most connected with is not in office, then I lose objectivity. And I'm speaking about in a generic voter, voter loses objectivity and clarity about what factually took place. For instance, and because I come from, just gonna put it on the table, I'm an African American, pastor African American church, so of course there is this there's a loyalty to the Democrat Party. Blacks vote for the Democrats at a 90% plus clip every election on the federal election side. So if you listen to how people remember the Obama administration, there's a lot of recounting that's just not factual. And when you hear people who are heavy supporters of Trump, who recount what the first Trump administration and the current Trump administration were like, there's a lot of things that are just not factual. And it's amazing how we lose the ability to be factual when we are highly anxious. And getting clear about facts, just saying, you know what, before I share what I think and what I believe, or what I want or don't want, or whatever it may be, let me just get clear about what actually happened. And to become, I love that whole concept of putting on my researcher's mind. Let me just become a statistician and just get the facts. What did Dragnet used to say? Just the facts.
Yes, just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah, just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts, sir. And so, when I can enter into that space, and I notice that it's very challenging to enter into that space, the more anxious, the more annoyed we become.
Yeah. I think that is so useful to think through too. I was teaching last week on solid self and was reading some of the research on how when we're tense enough that like our brains actually lose that ability to be objective. Like that emotional thinking is what's driving us. And so I think what I was talking to this class about is that idea of, like you said, Robert, to define your principles and your values and your belief system so that when the tension does go up, I think I can just speak for myself personally. If I've thought about it ahead of time, I at least have a better chance of
Yes.
pulling at some principle because my brain will go to that emotionality. I think that that's just the way the nervous system functions. So doing that work ahead of time, like you had named, of what are my guiding principles, then I have something to grab onto as the tension jacks up.
My example, there's a song in my example that will speak to what you guys are talking about. So I like to keep things light. Wall-E for AI, and I did another Disney movie here for our politics episode. It's a movie I grew up watching. It's called The One and Only Genuine Original Family Band. It's a Disney movie from 1968. It's based on a real family band, the Bauer family. Buddy Epson from the Beverly Hillbillies is in it. 17-year-old Kurt Russell is in it. It's Goldie Hawn's first movie. It's really, really good music. But it's a family divided over politics, but they create this music together. And so it's based around the 1888 election between Grover Cleveland and Benjamin Harrison. And so I could sing you, "Let's put it over with Grover," and "Harrison will make our land a garrison of life and liberty." They have all these songs. And when I was looking into the movie a bit more, Harrison and Cleveland actually disagreed about tariffs, which I thought was amazing, since that's what we're living in 2026. And an extra side note is it was written by the Sherman Brothers, who wrote Mary Poppins and lots of Disney stuff. And the Sherman Brothers had a highly conflictual relationship, but they came together and created these great musicals. Anyways, so one song, as you guys were talking, is each side on election night, they're sort of like yelling back and forth at each other and singing to each other. And they're going through all of these things that have been done. And the one side will say, "That's politics." And the other side will say, "Well, that's statesmanship." And so I'm like, how much does our side influence how we factually see something? Was that a political kind of, get your own way kind of move, or was that a statesman-like, considering the good of the many? So anyways, good music, good life lessons, and it's 100 years out, so people aren't in Harrison Cleveland camps anymore, so you can kind of look at it and enjoy it.
Different perspective on the past. Yeah.
And how do we get in 2026? How do we emotionally remove ourselves 100 years later? And that's a big challenge. As I shared before, and then I'll actually share what my song is, or it's actually a song. But it's amazing. Again, I shared Obama a moment ago, but it's amazing how people have already forgot how tumultuous things were after 9/11.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember how panicked America was the weeks and months following 9/11. Yeah. I remember going to airports. I remember feeling the suspicion with everyone I saw. And as they say, confession's good for the soul. I remember getting on the plane and looking to see if I saw anyone who I thought was Arab. And knowing where they were sitting and trying to identify who I thought would, if it ever came to where there would be a fight or something on the plane, who do I think would kind of be the allies? Who were the buff guys? Who were the guys that looked somewhat healthy? And I was in my 20s at the time. So I was, thinking to myself, okay, this is the person that can do this, that, and the other. So I just remember how tense it was. And it's amazing how we go through these cycles in our nation, in our families, and we forget that we've already gone through the cycle before. The song that I think about is from my favorite female vocalist, Sarah Vaughan. And she sings a song, "Sending the Clowns." I think Barbara Streisand is more popular for singing that song, "Sending the Clowns." And it's just kind of like, we can never get on the same page when I'm up in the air, isn't it rich, isn't it queer? Me here at last on the ground, you in midair. So it's kind of like when I was on the ground, you were in the air. When I was in the air, you were on the ground. We just can't never. We might as well just send in the clowns because we can't never seem to get on the same page. And I think that in some ways defines politics. When you really look at it from a historical perspective, the political parties have changed so much in their views on different issues. And it's kind of like, man, you would think now that we'd be somewhat harmonious since we've come to this agreement, but it's like we've totally switched over.
Yeah.
And you're in the air, me on the ground, And of course, I guess we're sitting in the clown. We're sitting in the clowns in many ways. Well, that's the song that I think about when I think about the state of politics and how we approach it.
It brings me to a question. I'd be interested in your thinking, Robert. Do you think there is something to that polarization? I always think about this idea of homeostasis in a system. And is there something about a system that keeps pushing people back to these differences that is what the system keeps working towards, is this polarization, this difference? That I appreciate that example, right? Because the Republican Party espouses some values that years and years ago, right, the Democratic Party used to espouse. So to think about that there's sort of this way that people keep moving towards difference. I don't know. Would you have any thinking on that?
Just as an illustration, the Republican Party was against the Confederacy.
Yeah.
And now it's the Republican Party, to many degrees, is defending the Confederate flag and the Confederate statues.
Yeah.
So you've gone full circle. The Democrats was the party of the KKK.
Yeah.
They were the party of anti-integration and Jim Crow law. And now, they're viewed as the party of civil rights, human rights, etc. So I think we've gone a full circle. Now, one of the things that I think about, and I don't know how accurate this is, but one of the things I think about as it relates to the polarization is, to what extent, and this is the question that I've come up with, to what extent does othering people help to reinforce our togetherness?
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? So in order for us to have a strong togetherness force and a strong togetherness bond, do we need someone who's on the outside?
Right.
And I've read a lot of Bowen, but I'm not sure if Bowen or Kerr or if Dr. Papper or any of them have actually spoken to this. But I'm wondering, the more that we desire and move toward togetherness, the more we automatically need someone to have on the outside position. And I know how that, I think through that with triangles, and I guess this is a component of triangles, but just looking at it from a togetherness force, I don't know. That's just something that I've thought about, how I've been thinking, Katie.
I know that, I think it was Bowen wrote, so I'd have to look it up. Maybe I can find something about that togetherness, like that. I'm going to use the word immature togetherness forces will try to impinge upon a group. Like that is something that does naturally occur, but I can't pull up that reading in my brain right now. But I know he had, I want to say it's around some of the EPA papers when he was talking about societal emotional process, was talking about that.
Oh, so that's something I'd be very interested in.
Yeah, I'll find it.
I was even thinking just how cozy it is when you agree with someone.
It is.
How nice it feels, and when you have someone to put the blame on or think they're stupid or whatever. Not necessarily in these big, big groups of people ways, but just sort of, around the table in our lives.
Yeah, this is, as those of you who have listened to me before would know, this is a bit, I do think I get interested also in the side of a mature togetherness, a coming together of people around a unified idea to make a difference. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I get interested in using theory concepts is when tension rises in the system, does it provide the pressure for people to get clearer in what they think, get clearer in what they will or won't do. I mean, I get interested in that. I think someone has said, I don't know who, it's hard to differentiate a self in really calm times. Like, it's just, you need a little tension in the system to be able to do that work. So I wonder sometimes if, the tension, the pressure, the intensity got people really clear and had good things happen. I mean, I think the women's movement, civil rights movement, that was a time of intense pressure where people did unify to create, in my view, positive change in the system.
And yet for me, to kind of think about it from a different perspective, Katie, for me, and this is another political system that I'm a part of, I pastored for over 23 years. And so I was very much a part of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. And I still identify out of all the denominations, my theological understanding mostly aligns more with Seventh-day Adventism than any other denomination. That's just me personally. However, after we had the pandemic and people weren't going to church, and that was around, I transitioned from pastoral leadership in 2019. The pandemic hit in early 2020. And so I had a time of calm when I was actually apart from the system, meaning I wasn't attending church each week, and I wasn't in the Bible studies each week and all those things. When I went through the process, and this was the time that I joined the postgraduate program. And so I began that process of actually thinking about, how did I come to this place of believing these doctrines, accepting these theological beliefs? And I needed that calm. In order for me to be in a thinking space to go through that. And that was the best of times and the worst of times, because now that I have gained more clarity around what I think theologically, and how do I maintain relationships with people who are still strongly devout Seventh-day Adventists, although I don't necessarily share all of the theological, but more than theological, I think it would be more the policies and practices that many of Seventh-day Adventists. And for me, the biggest struggle, as we talk about politics, the biggest struggle for me has been trying to determine, what do I share and what do I not share. Good friend of mine who got me started in thinking about Bowen back in the early 2000s, he spoke at my church and he said, I make myself known so that I might be known. He's the chairman of the psychology department at Loma Linda University. I just thought about that. But he said, I make myself known so that I might be known. And that blew my mind and started me on a journey that ultimately led to Bowen. But with that being said, to what point do I share my new thinking? And to what point do I hold it because I know that it's not going to serve any other purpose than to cause argument and debate? And that has been such a struggle of mine to figure out, where is that balance? Because I don't want to be reactive on the one side and say, well, I just keep it, to keep a peace and calm in the system. I'll keep my thoughts to myself. Then I don't want to go to the other side, which is, well, I'll just share everything and let the chips fall where they may. And finding that balance has been challenging, especially, lastly, as I am still not 100% clear. I am gaining clarity. I view myself less as a Christian or even a Seventh-day Adventist, and more as a disciple of the man Jesus Christ, of the man Jesus, the son of Joseph. As I'm wrestling through it, what do I share? And I think, and I use that example because I think that that's what we all wrestle with from a political perspective. What do I share? What do I share about, my thoughts on reproductive rights, or my thoughts on civil rights, or my thoughts on guns and or whatever it may be, the Second Amendment, as they like to say, or when do I just keep it to myself because sharing it is going to do nothing but provoke the situation, and it's not even necessary?
Such a great question. And I think it's come up throughout this whole season, because I think a lot of what these hot topics are our beliefs, right? Like our belief systems are thinking about our positions, our principles. And I think, there's times where context is really, really important in what you choose to share of yourself and not. I mean, there's probably, I think, and it would differ. I mean, the three of us would have very different experiences of how we travel through the world, and that some contexts are safer than others to put out our thinking. So I just think that work you just identified is just, yeah, I'm going to go home and think a lot about that. Go home. I suppose I am home, but think more about that.
Well, and I think that's where I was going with giving that example with me and my dad. And when I talked to him last night, can I use this example on the podcast? And I said, I'm mostly going to talk about what a jackass I was in just throwing that out at you, on election day. And so there's been lots of chances through the years to think about, is there another way that I could define my different beliefs? I used to be a card-carrying member of my dad's political party, and we've sort of run the gamut of, maybe I'll shut up, or maybe I'll lobby that little joke at him, or maybe I'll get really conflictual. I think you try it all in your family. Yeah. But just to think about it, how am I showing up as we talk about these things where we differ?
I just recently read an article I'd never heard of before by W.B. Du Bois, and it was 1956, and the title of the article was "Why I'm Not Voting in This Election." And he really gave a beautiful explanation, very well defined. Let me make sure that I'm correct about the information I just shared. It's it's W.B. Du Bois, and Why I Won't Be Voting in 1956. And the Nation took the speech and put it into, took his article, and you can actually play it and listen to it. But I think he does a great job at defining his thoughts. And it was all centered around, of course, civil rights and the treatment of Blacks in America. But he gave a good rationale as to why he's going to sit that election out. Very well. But sharing that with people, and especially coming from a Black community where, in the history of this nation, we've only had the right to vote maybe like 20% of America's history. I'm not good with math, but since 1965, whatever that equals to. And so there, especially from the older Black community and the Christian community, who was very instrumental in civil rights, not voting is like betraying your heritage. Like, and they literally, this is the expression, Dr. King and others died so that you could have the right to vote. And that's actually correct.
Right.
So when you say, well, I'm not going to vote, and again, when do I say that? And there have been elections where I vote every election, but there have been elections I've had to abstain from voting on the top part of the vote, or even some of the middle parts. I just didn't feel comfortable for either candidate. But sharing that, or do I keep it to myself? And am I keeping it to myself because I'm afraid of how the reactivity? So there is that big wrestle. And I think W.B. Du Bois did a great job in sharing his thinking around that.
And putting your thinking out there to a challenging. So it's so useful I didn't come up with a specific example, but I went on a deep dive I get really interested in leaders who take difficult positions that at the time might be seen as not popular, and are willing to hold on to those positions. And we retrospectively look and think, useful. I thought about it because I'm married to an Australian. And so I was talking, every time gun control comes up, they always talk about the move in Australia, about holding on to banning. They had a mass shooting banning weapons that wasn't necessarily popular, but that, the government saw it through. So thinking about what goes into a leader who is willing to hold on to a principle at a cost. I mean, I think in today's, especially in the United States and maybe even in Canada, like politician is a profession. I don't know that was the way it was designed to be years ago with the Constitution of the United States or elsewhere, but like it's a profession that to risk and define self and hold on to a position in the face of losing your job. I think that that's interesting to me. What goes into that? So there were a few people that came up, throughout history. Abraham Lincoln always comes up as to kind of holding on to a position. My search saw Gerald Ford was an example they gave, Nelson Mandela, Mikhail Gorbachev, a gentleman from Singapore that I'm not going to know, and just people in history that, at least in my search, that decided to take a position that might not have been popular, but was based on some principle that they had thought through. And I think those are people to get interested and look for, specifically from a Bowen theory standpoint, is, how does a leader get clear on their position and hold on to it in the face of pretty intense pressure at times?
I looked at Tommy Douglas. I'm from Saskatchewan. So Tommy Douglas is the man who brought universal health care to Canada, which America still doesn't have, right?
Yeah.
And looking at that process of bringing it to the province, and he said, I read today that the political leaders in the province at the time took like a significant pay cut in order for there to be funding to be able to go to healthcare, and then the process of it expanding to the country, and just the time it took, but the helpfulness of that process and the discomfort that it was, and the challenge that it was in lots of ways. And then 70, 80 years out, I mean, there's some challenges with our healthcare system. But I do appreciate universal healthcare.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Robert.
And for people who are thinking about how do I get clear about my thinking, another individual I thought did a phenomenal job was Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yes.
And it's not around the voting rights or any of those things. He was a Baptist preacher in the South. So what was he going to do but stand up for Blacks having the right to vote, or Blacks having the right to public accommodations, etc.? That was not the pushback. His biggest challenge was actually opposing the war in Vietnam. He became ostracized by the Black community as a result of that.
Wow.
Many people don't realize this. He lost a ton of support and was roundly and surmisely criticized and rejected, because Lyndon B. Johnson was doing so much to advance civil rights in his legislation that rebuking him and standing up against the war in Vietnam was seen as very foolish. That you have an ally on the issue that's most important to Blacks, and now you are alienating that ally by standing up against a war in another country. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So when he gives that rationale, I believe he spoke at the Abyssinian Church in New York. It's easy to find, but it's why I oppose the war in Vietnam. You can both read it or listen to it. But I believe it's the Abyssinian Church in Harlem, New York, that he gave the speech. And he really just methodically articulates, this is my thinking about why it's important at this time. He acknowledges how others who thought it was a bad idea were not crazy, that they actually had valid reasons. But this is why I have to do it and why I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah. And what a great example of a gifted leader who can both get clear what their position is and then be able to communicate it clearly. I think I just want to put that, because I think that's a thinking and getting clear for yourself, but then being able to communicate with others your position so clearly.
And I think another aspect of clarity is acknowledging that the other person's point of view is not irrational or ignorant or whatever it may be, whatever, derogatory terms you want to, or minimizing terms you want to use, to say, I understand. I lived in the South until 2016 when I moved to Denver. So I come from DC, liberal, moved down south, ultra conservative, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas. Then I come up here to Denver, Colorado, ultra liberal. And I actually understand. There's a lot of positions, and I'm not going to get into my positions here, but there are a lot of positions that I hold that are not in line with what people in Louisiana hold.
Hmm.
But I understand. They're not crazy. They're not crazy when they say, we want this, that, and the other, or we don't believe that this is acceptable. They're not just, Neanderthals who want to oppress people. They actually have, and to be able to get to a place where I not only am clear about what I believe, but I can understand why others hold a differing view. I can respect that and still maintain my posture and my position. I think is so important.
And hard work.
Oh, it's hard. It is hard. Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to use the example in the religion episode, but I never got to it. But my husband's a pastor, and sometimes I bemoan the churches that we end up in because I never quite fit. And he said, no matter where we go, the place will be too liberal or too conservative. So we just need to be ourselves. And I get irritated because I've been studying Bowen theory for 10 years and he's more differentiated than I am. And but then he'll say, yeah, it's a nice saying, but how do you live it out? Like, it's just so challenging.
Yeah.
To live out being yourself. Yeah. Well, did we get to everyone's examples? Do we want to go to takeaways or resources for people?
Yeah. My takeaway is easy because I found it really useful too. And I think Robert came up with, like, read some history. That's my take. I just think it's so useful to reflect how many trends repeat themselves and how does that. I mean, I think it allows me on a good day to get a little more distant from some of the emotional intensity and be able to see how, just how to watch it over time. I think that that's useful for me. So that's my encouragement to people, to do a little reading and some history, especially around an area that you're interested or reactive about.
My takeaway, if we cover so many stuff, but if I had to narrow it down just to one, my takeaway is to get curious. I think that that's really one of the key tenets of Bowen theory, to genuinely become curious. And one of the ways that has helped me from a political perspective, and has even helped me as I've had to come out to my family about my evolving theological views and spiritual and religious views, is to just ask them, well, tell me what you're thinking. I'm not here to argue. I'm not going to rebut. I'm not going to refute. I just want to hear your thinking. And I do the same thing with politics as well sometimes, not as much as I should. We've always mastered it when we're telling the story. It's in real life that we screw everything up. So in real life, I'm a train wreck. But so just know that. But,
you're among
but I attempt. Thank you so much. My attempt. So I'm going to share what my attempt is. My attempt is to listen to people with that I know hold differing views than mine, and to listen and to ask questions, not to argue or to catch them or to gotcha, but really just to understand their thinking. Unfortunately, it typically devolves into gotcha, and I struggle with listening for listening's sake. But that's where I start off with. That's my goal. Right. One day I'm going to get there. That's my promise, Dixie. That's my promise, Katie.
It is such a good one. Yeah. Dixie, did you have a takeaway?
Well, my takeaway, I've linked to it before, but the Bowen Center Family Matters, they did 2 recordings on, basically, one is political reactivity and self-regulation, and making decisions in the midst of an emotionally aroused social environment. So really, how to get clear when you are in the soup of all of the polarization and discomfort. So I'll link those. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for sharing your thinking with us today, Robert.
Thank you. Thank y'all for being so patient. I know I'm a talker. Y'all are so kind. Y'all just let me ramble on aimlessly and endlessly. But thank you so much for your kindness.
And I also want to put in, if you'd like to support the behind the scenes efforts of making this podcast run, we will put a link into our coffee site where you can buy us a coffee to support us. If you'd like to learn more about Bowen theory, please check out Living Systems website. We are enrolling for our programs, which will start in the fall. They're up and running. So please reach out and find opportunities where you can learn more. I also will connect you to Robert's organization of TOCA.colorado.org, where you can learn more about what he's doing. And we will link that down below as well. And I think that's all of the announcements I have, but there's lots of opportunities to learn more about theory if this is interesting to you. Have a conversation.
Good. Well, I hope our listeners take away lots of ideas that can keep you thinking in this time where politics is front and center, and all the ways that you want to show up as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.